Good evening, all. Acm-Vit is here to present today's webinar on full stack web development. This webinar majorly focuses on knowing the basics of web development and streamlined freelancing. Here, you will be given a perspective about an important sector in computing and information technology. This will introduce, motivate, and help students pursue and explore web development and enhance coding and technical skills. I welcome the speaker of the event, Mr. Aquib Ajani, who is an academic expert at Upgrad. He is a workshop mentor at My Captain and has mentored over 10,000 students in web development. I hope you all give your input today and gain the maximum knowledge in this webinar. Thank you.
Right. Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Yes. Hi, guys. So, right. So the session, as I have planned it, is majorly divided into three segments. In the first one, we'll discuss what I like to call the journey of a website, because there is a misconception out there that, especially when we were in college, there was this misconception that web dev is just about coding, but there are actually five more steps. So it's actually a 6-7 step process that we don't typically discuss in college. So that is where I want to begin with. So we'll discuss all the different steps involved in the process, number one. Number two, we'll talk about the major components that make up a website. So these are some common things that you will find across all websites, irrespective of what the website is about. And then number three will be the Q&A bit, where whatever questions you guys might have regarding this, we'll answer all of those. So yes, I hope that you guys get to learn something that you did not know before. That is the only intention behind the whole session. So let's jump right in. Hopefully you can see the screen and the PPT as well. Right. So before we get to that, let me quickly introduce myself as well. Even though they did give a pretty accurate introduction. So there are just two words that define who I am and what I do. Number one is developer, and number two is educator. Right. So my first half of the day is majorly coding or development, and then the second half, usually in the evenings, is where I mostly take sessions. Right. So I actually started taking sessions way back in college itself, and ever since then, for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been mentoring with different startups, in the edtech space. And I've been really fortunate to work with some of the best companies out there. So I've been taking sessions with My Captain for a really long time. I've been teaching with Upgrad for a really long time. I've also worked a little bit with Unacademy and a whole bunch of other companies out there. So yes, that is a quick introduction to the education bit. And I think it mostly started off by solving doubts for friends in school and college, and then it led to taking some sessions in classrooms in college, and then eventually to now it being a major part of what I do on a daily basis, right?
So
So
there's a
yes,
bit of
that
lag
is
on the
me.
stream. So just a second.
Yeah, okay. So yes, yeah, so that is basically me. And the second half is about coding. So I am a full stack developer, uh, and I have worked on about a dozen or so websites so far. So the past 4 years or so that I've been working in the industry, I have made over about a dozen projects as a freelancer, again for different startups, different types of websites, different scale of scope of work, and all of that. So yes, I'll just try to share a couple of things that I have learned in this whole journey for the past few years with you guys. All right, so that is me. And before the pandemic hit, I was also taking sessions by going to different campuses. But unfortunately, now that everything is online, we have to do this online. Otherwise, this would mostly have been an in-person session, right? So yes, let's jump into the first bit, which is the definition of a website. And in the PPT, you will not find anything but memes. So that is one thing that I should warn you about. There are just memes all across the PPT and nothing else, because this is the best way to understand what I want to put forth, right? So let's begin with the first thing, which is the definition of a website, or how we understand it. And every time I ask this question to people, I get so many weird responses, and they go into all technical jargon that website is server and client and database and this and that. But in plain simple English, a website is a way of portraying information digitally, right? That is it. Nothing more, nothing less. It is just a medium where we share information, mostly about a
So could you
particular
wait?
topic.
We're facing a bit of issue.
Sure, yeah. Just let me
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Harsh, sort the scene out now.
I hope it's not from my end.
No, no, sir.
Okay. All right, perfect. So yes, sorry for the glitch, you guys. But yes, let's get back to where we were. So the question was, what is a website? And again, every time I ask this question to people, I get a whole lot of technical jargon, like it is a server, client, database, this, that, HTML, Moon, React, all of those things. But if we put this in plain, simple English, a website essentially at the end of the day is just a place to get information, and a digital place to get information, mostly about a specific topic. It could involve products, companies, startups, landing pages, blogs, all kind of things. So that is essentially what a website is. And another thing that that a lot of people, like I already mentioned, is a misconception that it is just about coding or it is very difficult or skill to learn. So yeah, so I'm just here to tell you that that is not the case. You should know the whole process, obviously, but more importantly, that whole process requires so many people, and it is not just one person who is going to make it. So there are 6 7 different steps, and every step requires multiple people working on it to eventually build it. Then the next term that is pretty confusing or pretty used in a manner that is confusing is web design, right? So again, a lot of people confuse the two terms or use them simultaneously or synonymously, web design and web development. So again, they are two different terms. Design and development are not the same thing. And when it comes to web design, it is mostly to do with the visual aspects, right? The color choices, the font choices, the graphics that we use, all of those things, how things are styled, how are they arranged, all of that. That is a part of web design, right? On the other hand, web development is coding. It simply put, web development is where you actually sit down and write some code. So design actually comes before development in the process. We'll discuss the process in a few minutes, right? So again, web design versus web dev. A web designer is a graphic artist, and a designer is responsible for the visual aspects. So the layout, usability, font, color, what components to use, do we use human photos or graphics, all of those kind of things, right? On the other hand, a web developer is someone who is responsible for converting the design into a functioning website. So the web designer's output is taken as the input by the developer, and then the developer is required to code it out, right? That is the idea. And development is where we learn the programming bit. So to be a web designer, you don't need any programming knowledge, right? You need graphic knowledge. To be a web developer, on the other hand, obviously you need programming knowledge. So those are the two terms, and that is how they are different. Hopefully the difference is clear. Perfect. So that is the first bit. Now let's jump to the components of a website. These are 4 or 5 things that every website contains, no matter what it is about. It could be an e-commerce website, could be a blog, could be YouTube, could be a streaming service, could be anything. These are certain things that every single website contains. And again, you need to know this before you get started, right? So the first component is known as the header. And a header is basically the first section of the website. Everything that you can see on the website before the scroll, right? That is what a header is. So again, everything that you can see on the website before you scroll down, that entire first section is called the header. So here are a few examples. And again, what I've done is, so while I was making the PPT, I was wondering what examples to show here. And then I was like, fine, let me just take screenshots of my own projects, so that there are no copyright issues, as well as I'm able to explain them better since I have developed these myself, right? So here's the first one. You can see this is for an e-commerce company. It's called Glamming Beauty, and they sell beauty and cosmetic products, right? So this entire section is the header. So you can see on the top left, we have the number and email. Then we have the logo of the company. On the top right, you have my cart, my account, the cart icon, all of that. And then under it, you have the menu. So all of these, items, or all of these elements are a part of the header. Then you typically also have either a slider or a background image, like you can see in this one. Then the title of the page, which is Glamming Beauty, then a subtitle or a description, which is Beauty, Cosmetics, and Personal Care Products, and then a call to action button. Again, a CTA or a call to action button is a very important part of the header, because ideally, what should happen is whoever is visiting the website should be able to figure out what to do with the page before they scroll down. It should be that obvious before they scroll down. Hence, the button that you have, the CTA button, the call to action, is very important on a website. And that is the only bit that tells the user what they can do. For example, in this case, you can see browse products, that is the CTA. Then the next bit is this. So this project was basically a test page where we wanted to test out if people are interested in the idea or not. And again, you can see the same set of components. There is a logo and name on the top left. There is a menu on the top right. The CTA in this case is the get in touch button on the extreme right or top right. And then again, there's a background image and a description. So world's most popular online marketplace for collaboration and entrepreneurship. That is the subtitle or heading, whatever you want to call it. Basically, again, it is pretty clear what the page is about, and there is a CTA get in touch. Then the third section is uh, the third example is again an edtech platform, and this is called unboxing art. And this is a course page, and this is where you can see details of the course. Again, you can see a lot of components, the logo name on the top left, the menu on the top right. Then there is a trailer video that you can see along with a background image, of course. And then there is the heading of the course, a small description, then two call to action buttons: download the brochure and explore the course. So again, the user knows what they can do. They can either see the whole brochure or they can explore the course. Then this is number 4. This was for a software development agency where they make websites and apps, right? And again, you can see there are the contact details and the logo on the top left, the menu on the top right, background image, a header, description, and a call to action, which is browse our portfolio. So again, the point is, no matter what, so these 4 websites are 4 very different things, right? The first one is an e-commerce website. The second one is a product landing page. The third one is an edtech uh, website, and the fourth one is a company website. But irrespective of all of that, you will notice that the components in the header or the elements that make up the header are pretty much the same. So that is the first component, which is the header. Then the second bit is the footer, and the footer is more flexible. There are no mandatory, component that the elements that are required as such. You can have whatever way you want. So for example, the footer number 3 that you can see is a plain simple footer with just the email and copyright. On the other hand, in the first example, you can see there are some form fields, which is like a get in touch form. So that is one additional element that they have. On the second example, you can see it is a lot more detailed. You can see join the community, you can see a small description, social media icons, privacy policy, terms and conditions, then copyright information. So all of these things are what make up the footer. Again, irrespective of what website you visit, you will see a footer there as well. And that is number 2. Then number 3 is the main content. So the third component is everything between the header and the footer that makes up the main content. So again, different examples from the same projects. So in the first one, that is about the company that makes websites and apps. So you can see recent work and client testimonials. Those are the two most important things that they want on the page. In the case of an edtech platform, there are best-selling courses, there are some statistics, and there is feedback. In the product landing page, there is benefits of working with us, there are featured resources and stuff like that. So again, header plus footer plus main content typically makes up the entire website. Then number four is head and body. Now these terms are associated with the code, right? So when we start writing the code for a website, there are two. A website is divided into two parts: head and the body. The body contains everything that you can see. So everything that we have discussed so far, header, footer, main content, etc. All of this makes up the body of the website. And then head is everything that you cannot see. So all your search engine content, your keywords, your some code that you might have written, some functionality, database connections, all of these things that the user does not need to know about, right? That or the functionality, the brain of the website is the head, and body is everything that the user can see. So these are a few terms. And then finally, front end versus back end. So when it comes to front end versus back end, again, so this meme will make it very clear. Front end is everything that is visible, and back end is everything that you can't see. Mostly backend consists of functionality and database, and front end is all the visual or the content, right? So your forms, tables, images, videos, graphics, all of that makes up the front end. For example, if you visit any website and you see a login form, so that form, the way it looks, the information that you enter in the form, all of those things until you press the button is the front end. As soon as you press the button, what will happen is your details from the form are fetched, then they'll be taken to the database, and they will be compared to the values stored in the database. Only if the username password that you have entered matches the username password from the database, only then you will be taken to the home page. So this whole process of matching your credentials to check if they're valid or not, this is something that you cannot see on the website. You cannot see it happening, but obviously it is still happening behind the scenes. So that bit is the backend. That whole functionality of getting content from the form, fetching it from the database, comparing the values, and then deciding what to do. All of that makes up the backend. So here's another example. Again, front end is everything that you can see, and backend is everything that you cannot. So these are a few terms that are associated with a website. So again, we've discussed header, footer, main content. We've discussed head and body of a website, and we've discussed front end and back end. Now that was the first bit. So now let's jump to the next one, which is the web dev process. Right. So again, we have discussed what makes up a website, and now let us discuss how do you actually go about it. So there are a couple of steps that are there, 6 steps to be precise. And again, different companies might give them different names, or they might split a step further into two different steps or stuff like that. But more or less, this is what it involves. Right. So what I will do is I will tell you all the steps, and I'll also try to tell you the different job roles that exist for every step in the industry. Right. So we'll discuss a step, what it contains of, and then what job roles can you expect in that step. Right. So again, first off, you can see the meme here. I don't always need a website, but when I do, I have no idea where to start. So what this is basically the problem that we are trying to solve with this session, right? Most of you might be interested in web dev, or you might want to start off in it, but you have no idea how to begin. That is the scene with pretty much everybody, and it was the same scene with me as well. Because if you get a campus placement and if you go to web dev through that approach, then it's fine. Then the company will train you, they will tell you what it consists of and all of that. But if you start freelancing, kind of, like the way I did, then you have to figure it out on your own. It freelancing is where nobody will teach you as such. You have to take up a course, or you have to do your own research and understand what the whole thing is about. So let me quickly tell you in brief. Obviously there is a much more detailed explanation for everything, but I'll just quickly walk you guys through the process. So the first step is called requirements engineering, and people who might have a computer science course or an IT course in the college, they might have this topic in one of the subjects called requirements engineering, right? And a requirement, in simple terms, is a functionality or a feature on the website. So everything that you see on the website is because of a certain requirement. For example, the website might require the user to make a payment. The website might require a user to add products to the cart. The website might require a user to be able to log in. So everything that is there on the website exists because of a certain requirement. right? So this first step obviously is about figuring out what all should go on the website, what all is needed on the website. So it involves two things. It involves requirements gathering and it involves requirements analysis. So requirements gathering is typically where you sit down with your client and you discuss all the features that are needed. And requirements analysis is where you take up all those requirements and you analyze them. So whether it is possible to make something like that, how complicated it is, how important it is for the project. So the priority, the time required, the money, the cost involved, all of those things. So at the end of this step, what you have essentially is a list of all the features that you want on the website. That is what the first step is about. Then step number two is wireframing. And in wireframing, basically what happens is it is the design, right? The web design aspect that we discussed. That is what this step is about. So in the case of wireframing, again, you have two things. You have a lo-fi design and a hi-fi design. Now there are different terms in the industry for this. Some people call it visual design. Some people call it wireframe. Some people call it mock-up. Some people call it hi-fi, lo-fi. So there are different terms that are used. And first of all, the lo-fi bit is where you just have the structure. And so you just create the structure and that's it. So like the first example that you can see, the one that says wireframe, that is essentially your lo-fi design where you just make boxes or you just block areas where you want something to go. For example, you might decide that this is where the chat will show up. If you take the Facebook interface, you will decide that this is where the chat shows up, this is where the news feed will be, this is where the notifications will be, this is where the other options will be, and so on. That is the lo-fi. Then the next thing is you make a mock-up or you make a hi-fi design, and this consists of adding the visual elements, right? So of course you add the color, font, graphics, images, all of those things, and that makes it a final design. So the hi-fi design or the mock-up or the visual design should look like the final product, right? That is the idea. It should look exactly like the final product. So again, in the meme, you can see the second image. That is pretty much what the mock-up is. Of course, since this is a meme, the final product is obviously exaggerated, but a mock-up typically looks like the final product itself. So basically, step one, you figure out what you want on the website. Step two, you design how it should look like. And then we get to the third step, which is development. Now, when it comes to development, again, there are two things. There is front end and there is back end. Front end is developing everything or coding everything that is visible or that can be seen. Back end is coding all the functionality and the database. So that is what development is. When it comes to front end, there are only three languages. So there is HTML, there is CSS, and there is JavaScript, and that's it. So no matter what framework you use, no matter what you do, front end will always, at the end of the day, consist of these three languages, and that's it. HTML, CSS, JavaScript. HTML for the content, CSS for the styling, and JavaScript for the basic front end functionality. Right? That is the first bit. Then the second component of development is backend. Backend is where things get a little challenging because technically speaking or theoretically speaking, every single programming language that you can code in can be used for the backend. Right? So technically it is possible to write the backend using C, C++ as well. But of course we don't do it because there are languages that are specialized for web dev like PHP, Python, Ruby, Java. All of these languages consist of libraries or components that make it easy to develop the backend of a website. So that is what development involves. Again, front end and back end. Front end consists of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and the choice of the backend language depends on what kind of a data you're working with. Right? It depends on what you're doing with the website. Yeah, so that is the development bit. And again, the choice depends. So for example, if it's a data analytics based project, Python is a better choice. If it's an e-commerce project, at times PHP is a better choice. So depending on what kind of a project you're working with, the choice of the backend language will change. Right? That is the idea for development. And the next step that is involved is testing. Testing, obviously, as the name says, is making sure everything works the way it is supposed to work. Right? So once you code something out, you have to test it to make sure that it is working as expected. Again, testing involves two things. It involves making sure everything works the way it should, and number two, you should also test for unexpected behavior. And so there are times when certain components behave unexpectedly. So first of all, you make sure everything works the way it should, and number two, you should also test it for unexpected behavior. For example, what happens when the Wi-Fi suddenly gets cuts off, gets cut off? or what happens when a user randomly opens this on a separate browser, stuff like that, or when they open two simultaneous sessions, all of those things. That is testing. So another challenge with testing when it comes to web dev, as you can see from the photo, is the sheer amount of devices on which you can open a website. Right, this is one of those things where so mobile application is fixed. Right, you can only open it on a phone screen size. A tablet application is the same. A laptop, proper desktop software like Photoshop is also the same. You have to open it on a laptop and that's it. But a website can be opened anywhere. Right? So all the way from a smartwatch to a phone to a tablet to a laptop to a desktop to a television, there are like a million devices, a million category of devices that you need to open a website in. And it should look good across all devices, right? Obviously, no matter where the user opens it up, they should be able to see it properly. Hence, testing is very important, and testing across different screen sizes is also important. Again, when it comes to development for multiple devices, we do that in the front end. So since it is the way it looks on the page, or since it is the way people see it, that is the front end, right? So that is the difference between that. So you first you develop front end, then you test it on different devices to make sure it looks good. That is that. Then number five is deployment. Deployment basically means putting it out there or putting it live, right? So in terms of a software, it would mean installing it on the system you want to use it. In terms of a mobile app, it would mean putting it on the Play Store or the Apple Store. In terms of a website, it means putting it live such that everybody can access it, right? So this is where we talk about the domain, server, hosting, all of those things. That is deployment. Then number six is maintenance. Maintenance is everything that happens after a website goes live. So of course, a website is never complete because once it is up, there might be some bugs or some issues that might come up. The company might want to make a new page. They might have a sale for which you have to make some changes. So stuff like this will constantly keep happening. Right. So again, a website is never really complete. You have to constantly maintain it to make sure it is working as expected. So these are the six different steps that are involved in web development. And this is the whole process of web dev, all the way from requirements engineering to wireframing to development, testing, deployment, and maintenance. Now let's quickly discuss the job roles as well. When it comes to requirements engineering, the job role is a requirements engineer. That is a term that is used, or there are other terms like user, it's called user researcher or other research-based terms. And mostly the responsibility is you have to interact with the client and understand what they want from the website. Now another thing to keep in mind is when you're doing this, you should be somebody who is ideally an extrovert. You don't mind talking to new people because that is literally what your job involves. And you have to constantly meet new people and talk to them. So that is the first bit, requirements engineering. Then when it comes to wireframing, the entire UI UX domain is what wireframing is about. So you have UI designer, UX designer, junior UX, senior UX, junior UI, senior UI, and there are graphic designers. So all of these different job roles are associated with wireframing. Then step three, development. Again, there are front end developers, back end developers, and there are full stack developers. A full stack developer is somebody who can code both front end and back end. For example, I am a full stack developer, which means I can make the entire website on my own. And that is development. So again, junior front end, senior front end, junior back end, senior back end, and junior full stack, senior full stack, all kind of job roles are available. Then testing. Testing also has tester has the job role. It's called software tester. And again, there are junior testers and senior testers. Deployment and maintenance don't specifically have job roles as such because what happens is most of the companies these two steps are taken care of by one single team. So if it is a development company, there is one team which handles the deployment for all projects because this is where the finances come in. So this is where you have to make payments for the server and put it up and stuff like that. So the deployment and maintenance is typically handled by a separate team, in a typical setup. So those are the different roles associated with different steps from an industry perspective, right? So to quickly recap, we have discussed about two things. Number one, we discussed about the basic web dev terminology. So we discussed what is a website, what is web design, web development. We talked about front end, back end. We talked about the different components, header, footer, main section, and then we discussed the entire web dev process. Now, the third component for the day is I'll quickly tell you my journey, the way I started off, and then we'll take the questions, right? So I'm going to just switch to the So I can either have the PPT open, or now we can switch to the camera, you guys. So if you want me to switch to the camera, let me know.
Yeah, Harsh pin source camera. Yes, so you can switch to the camera.
I can just keep the presentation running. Is that fine?
Yes, sir.
All right, perfect. Yes, so hopefully you guys can see me now. So yes, let me quickly tell you how I started with programming and how I ended up in web dev, and then it is all open for you guys. Whatever questions you guys might have, please feel free to ask. So my journey with programming began way back in school, in class 9th, right? So I was the vice house captain vice house captain of the house that I was in. I'm pretty sure you guys might also have had similar things. I don't know what you call them, but we call them houses. And I was the vice house captain, and there was a programming competition for. So there was a programming competition for which I was supposed to choose two people to participate. So I was supposed to find out two people who are interested in participating, and unfortunately, I could only find one. Right. So I asked around, nobody was interested. There was only one senior who was interested in participating, and that is how it happened. So unfortunately, I had to be the second person because I could not find anybody else, and I had zero experience in coding. I had no background, never coded before. I was in ninth. The senior was in 11th. Right. So in 11th, they had computer science, and he had learned something, but in ninth we did not have anything. Right. So that is how it started for me. I was in a competition with no absolutely no interest to be there, but and I already told him that I have no idea how this works, so this is all you. I'm just going to sit here and clap for you if you want me to. And then what happened was, he just gave me, so we were supposed to make two stick figures and move them across the screen, and this was with C++. And I had no idea how it worked, obviously. So what he did was, he drew those stick figures on a graph sheet and he gave me the graph paper, and he was like, tell me the coordinates. Right. So for the first 30 or so minutes, I was just sitting there, and I was telling him that the head starts at 200, 200, the tail starts at 500, 500, and stuff like that. I did that for about half an hour or so, and he was just coding something. I had no idea what he was doing. After those first 30, 40 minutes, he ran the code, and I saw two stick figures show up on the screen. Then he wrote code for another 30 minutes or so, and they started moving. Then I was just sitting there, and I was watching him do what he was doing, and I was so intrigued by that, that you could literally start from a blank file, and you can make the machine do whatever you wanted to. That was that spark, that was that aha moment for me, that I was just sitting there, I was looking at him code, and he started from a blank file, and he ended up creating something amazing. And that was my motivation to take up programming. Right. So obviously, then after that, I chose computer science for 11th and 12th. And in class 12th, we had to make a project for our submission. And me and a friend of mine, we took up the snakes and ladders game as a challenge, using graphics in C++, and we ended up making that whole game. It took us a good 3.5 months to build it, but I loved every day of working on it. Right. And I'll never forget that first day when everything ran perfectly fine for the very first time. That was the best thing ever. Right. We literally, it looked ugly. I'll confess, it looked ugly. It was terrible, but it worked. It was a yellow thing on a gray background. It was very ugly in that sense, but it worked. You could generate a random number, you could climb ladders, you could descend snakes, you could do whatever you wanted with the game. Right. It worked fine. So that was the whole, that those 3.5 months was so interesting for me, that we used to spend so much time in the lab working on it. And then at the end of the day, when it ran perfectly fine, that was the best feeling ever. So naturally, I decided that I wanted to take up computer science in college as well, and that is how I ended up in VIT. So this is Vellore Institute of Technology, and that is another story of how I got into it. But I was one of those few people who wanted to be there. So the branch was the 5 years integrated MTech software engineering degree, and I was one of the very few people who actually wanted to be there, and not forced into being there. Right. So most of my batch, I'm pretty sure this might be the case with some of you guys as well, that you might not have wanted to do engineering, especially computer science, and but your parents made you do it, or stuff like that. But I was one of those few people who wanted to be there. Right. So that is how it happened. And then before I got into college, right, those first few months that you have a gap after 12th and before college, I was pretty clear about what I wanted to do. I was very sure that I wanted to go there, pick up one language, learn it properly, take up a good job, and all set. That is what we think about when we get into the college. But and that is what I thought as well. But over the next few years, it completely changed. The way I thought it would be and the way it happened was completely different. When I was in the college, I quickly realized in my first semester itself that it is not just about coding, right? There are so many different domains within computer science. There is networking, there is data analytics, there is artificial intelligence, there is you know there is graphic work that you can do, there is hardcore programming that you can do, there is networking, so many bunch of things within one domain. And there were 20 25 different fields within one domain. And obviously you had to choose. You could not work across every domain, you have to pick one, right? So for the next year or so, so my first 2 years in college were mostly about figuring out what to do, right? Out of these all the options, what do I pick? And so for that, I did a lot of research, and research, according to me, was two things. Number one, reading about reading different books about these things, and number two, watching interviews. So I used to watch a lot of interviews of developers and designers and hackers and product managers and other people to understand what a day in their life is like and what they do on a day-to-day basis. And would I be interested in doing something like that for the whole day? And would I like being in their place? And I did that for almost all the fields that I just mentioned, and I ended up with three things, right? I ended up with web dev, app dev, and graphic design. I'll tell you the reason why. So the reason why I narrowed down on these three things specifically is because all of these three fields give us instant results. And I can just type one line of code, I can refresh and see the output. That is true for web dev and app dev, and it is also true for graphic design. You constantly see what is going on in front of you, right? But when it comes to these other fields, it is not like that. For example, in case of artificial intelligence, you have to first collect the data, then you have to create a model, then you have to train the model, and then eventually, after a few weeks of working on it, you start seeing results. Similarly, with ethical hacking, you first have to learn the whole coding, then you have to there is a whole process, and only then will you be able to hack into something. And you can't just hack from day one. But in this case, it was not like that. I could start coding from day one and could see results. So that instant feedback was the reason why I narrowed down into these three things. And out of that, I chose web dev because back then my laptop was not good enough to support Android Studio or um, Photoshop, which were used for graphic design and app dev. So I ended up with web dev. You just need two things: you need a browser and a text editor, and that I had on my laptop. Right. So that is how it started off. Took me 1 good year, 1 full year kind of, to learn it properly, and different things. Again, I did not take up any course back then. There were no courses at this scale. The sheer amount of option that you guys have today online is crazy. But back then that was not the case. We used to rely on books and YouTube videos mostly. Maybe Udemy, one course might be there on Udemy, stuff like this. Is 2015, 2016, right? Way um, a couple of years ago. EdTech was not this crazy back then. So yes, so I learned mostly from books and blogs and YouTube channels and stuff like that. And took me a good year to make my first few projects, right? And I remember the first website that I made was for a club, just like you are in ACM. I was in an NGO club in college, and there was an event that we were supposed to do, and it was a registration page for that event, right? It was just information about the event, and just a small form where you could enter your roll number and your name and email and register. That's it. It took me a good week, a full week, to make something this simple. Back then I can do it, in a couple of hours now, but back then it took me a full week, right? So that is how it started off. Then one thing led to another. um, so this one project went up, people registered over there, then other clubs saw this was happening, so I made 2 3 such pages. And then a faculty approached me, so we made a website for putting her research papers there. She wanted to share it with her colleagues and stuff like that. So I made one website like that. And then I had 2 3 projects to show. And so the first few projects will always be free. So this is a tip for everybody who wants to start freelancing. You have to have at least 3 projects to show in your portfolio. Otherwise, it does not make any sense. Right? Nobody is going to give you work unless you show them something, and not just one or two, but the magic number is three. always remember you need to have a minimum of 3 projects to show if you ever want to get into freelancing, right? So that is that. And so because of these things, the first event page and then these things, I had something to show. And then a cousin of mine called me up. So I was putting stories about all of this. I was putting stories that I'm learning this and I made this and stuff like that. And then he called me up and he's like, I want you to make an e-commerce website for me. There are no time constraints, you can take all the time you want, but would you be up for it? And I said yes, why not, and it was a paid project, so he was like, I'll give you whatever the standard rates back then were. And I was like, fine, sounds good. I was about to earn in college, so what could be better than that? And that is how it started off. Took me a good 4 months, 4.5 months to build that one e-commerce project, but it was perfect, right? It was not perfect from the design aspect, but it was perfect from the functionality aspect. You could see the products, you could filter products, you could add them to the card, you could make payments, not just the front end. Obviously, I had to make the whole back end as well, where you could see the coming orders, you could update the information, the tracking information, you could send receipts, you could send transaction confirmation, tracking messages, all sorts of things. Plus, you could also analyze. So there was some analytics that the number of orders per day, average amount of money coming in per month, stuff like that. So very interesting. I loved doing it. Took me a good 4 months, and that was my first paid project. Right. Another quick tip for freelancers here: your first project will always be from somebody you already know. Right. A stranger is never going to trust you with their projects. It will be somebody you already know directly or indirectly. It could be a friend of a friend, it could be your cousin, it could be your dad's friend, your uncle, your chacha, mama, somebody, but it will be somebody you already know. A stranger is never going to put money into something that they, so it could be a referral, right? The point is, it will always be a referral. You can't just generate a lead from Facebook and call them up and be like, let me make your project. That will not happen, right? Because you just don't have that kind of an authority or credibility by them. So when you're starting off, the best thing that you can do is you can let people in your network know that you're doing this. So start putting out stories about web dev, that you're learning it, that you're making something and stuff like that. Right? Very important. Only when people know that you're doing this will you start getting leads and referrals. So very important that you use social media for what it is supposed to be used. Let people know what you're up to, and that will definitely lead to positive results. And so today, as of now, I'm at a position where I get calls from like my school friends whom I haven't talked to in years. And they're like, we're looking for a web developer. Are you free? Will you be able to take up a project? Stuff like that. So it will obviously take some effort to get this kind of a network, but that is where you begin. And you start putting word out there, let people know that you're doing this, especially LinkedIn. Right? If you want to get into the professional space for freelancing, LinkedIn is the best platform right now. So start putting out messages out there, your learnings, what you can take a screenshot of this webinar, put it up there, tell people that you attended the webinar, or you could share the I saw the Acm-Vit post on LinkedIn. You could share that post and tell that you attended this, and this is what you learned, this is what was talked about, all of that. So all the small things that you share matter, right? And I'm not just saying spam it every day. Once in a while, once in a week, once every 10 days, once every 15 days, just keep putting a word out there that you're doing this. That way people will start uh, connecting it to you. So then it will be like whenever they hear somebody ask them for a web developer, they will refer you. Obviously that is how it happens, right? You don't go to Google and you're like, best web developer in Nagpur. You don't do that. You will call a friend and you're like, do you know any web developer? So we first look for referrals. If we don't find referrals, then we go online, right? So word of mouth is still the best publicity out there. And that is how it works. Start putting word out there and you will eventually start seeing results. Another thing to keep in mind, obviously, is you will not convert the first few leads, right? Obviously, the first few calls that you make, you have no idea what to discuss. Hopefully, you have a better idea now that we have discussed the whole process. But when I was starting off, I had no idea how it worked. I was giving them random rates, right? I had no idea how much to charge, how much time it would take, and stuff like that. That is something that you will learn with time. So the first few leads will not convert, obviously, but you just have to keep going until you get that first project that will convert, right? So in my case, it was the cousin of mine who gave me that e-commerce project, and that's it. So once that went up, then word started going out. He started referring me to more people. I started showing that project off to other people, and then more leads started coming in, and that is how it happened. right? So over the past few years, I have made about a dozen or so websites. Most of them are not online anymore because the startup shut down or they migrated to something else and stuff like that. But I did make up all those projects and I learned so much as well. On the simultaneously side by side, teaching was also going on, right? So again, like I mentioned before, it started off with uh, solving doubts for friends in school and then college, and then taking up some one topic, two topics in classes, and then eventually lead it became a full, not a full time thing, but a very important part time thing of my day, right? So I take up sessions almost every day, usually in the evening. So even today I have a session from 7:30 onwards, right? So, and yes, over the years I've worked with multiple companies in the edtech space, just taking sessions itself. So I worked with my captain, Upgrad. I worked with Graphy, which was an unacademy project for a while. And so, a lot of that has been going on. And in addition to that, I've been taking these sessions as well, where I talk to college students and I try to tell them things that I wish I would know back then, or I knew back then, right? So yes, that is me. That is how I started off. I'm pretty sure you guys can relate to some of it, at least the initial bit of how you got into programming, and then now it is your time to choose where to go next, right? So you can, like I said, you can explore different domains. There are so many courses now, so many platforms. You have so much choices out there. So pick up a bunch of courses, try different things out, and try to so instead of trying to find out things you like, try to cross things off that you don't like. Right. So that is my approach now to learning new things. I make a list of everything that are all the options out there, and then I start crossing things off. So for example, if I wanted to be a developer now, I would make a list of 10, 12 domains that are there, like cybersecurity, networking, ethical hacking, artificial intelligence, data analytics, and so on. And I'll explore one and I'll see, is that interesting? No, fine, cut it off. Is that interesting? No, cut it off. Doing that, you're only left with two or three choices, and then you choose one of them. And that is the approach. At least I think that should be the approach for now, because now you have information very easily available. So yes, that is me. That has been my journey. And yes, hopefully some of that made sense. Before we take up questions, there is just one quick bit about the resume that I wanted to talk about. So I'll just take 5 minutes and tell you a few things that you should keep in mind when making your resume, right? And I'm sharing these from an interviewer perspective, not a student perspective, because over the past few years, I've looked at a lot of resume and I've noticed a few things that that shouldn't be there or that could have been better. So let me just share those with you. You can keep those in mind. Just three simple things. Number one, your resume should be relevant, right? Number one, all the information there should be relevant. So don't mention that chess competition that you won in class 5 or class 7. Doesn't make sense unless it is an international achievement or a national level achievement. It does not make sense, right? So if you won it in a school or a club or a house, it's not relevant. And the idea is, make sure all the information that you have there is relevant. So this includes your extracurricular, this includes your um, courses that you mentioned, this includes whatever. So if you are a web developer, or if you are applying to be a web developer, in the resume that you're sending is for a web dev job role, then you can skip mentioning about graphic design. You can skip mentioning about um, something that is like digital marketing, something that is not directly relevant, right? You can skip that, provided you have enough other material. So obviously if there is not enough to fill in, then you can fill in whatever you have, but ideally you should keep it relevant. Point number one. Point number two, when it comes to the portfolio section of your resume, please make sure you keep three things in mind. In the portfolio section, number one, always put a link. Please make sure you use GitHub. There are so many free platforms like 000 Webhost, Netlify, all of these platforms that allow you to deploy a website for free, right? So if you have projects, please make sure you put a link to the project. Don't just write a description, not good enough. The interviewer wants to see what you have done. Just talking about it is not good enough, right? So number one, make sure there is a link. Number two, make sure you write a description of the project. So what was it about? And number three, make sure you mention the technologies used, right? Don't mention a project without talking about what you used to build it. So you can write HTML, CSS, PHP, JavaScript, whatever tech was used for every project. So three things for every project: link of the project, a small description, and the technologies used, in addition to the title, of course, right? So that is point number two. And point number three, when it comes to extracurricular or certifications and stuff like that, please mention it. Companies nowadays look for people who are more active in terms of extracurricular. So if you did an event, if you organized an event in college, like the organizers for today's event, please mention that in your resume. Let them know that you did organize this in college. Let them know that you attended a conference. Let them know that you did this webinar. Let them know that you uh, you know uh, participated in something, or you performed on stage, whatever extracurricular it is in college. Please mention it. Very important, right? So again, three simple things. Number one, keep it relevant. Number two, the project bit. So mention a link, put a link, write a description, and mention the technologies that you used. Number three, please mention extracurricular certifications, courses, events, webinars, or whatever you have attended. Right? Please mention those in the resume. That is actually super important. So yes, those are a few things when it comes to the resume bit. And yeah, that is pretty much it that I had from my side. And now the floor is open to you guys. So if there are any
There
questions,
are
any
questions
doubts,
in the
anything
YouTube
that you want
chat.
to ask, please feel free to.
So there are questions in the YouTube chat. So I've sent the link on the chat, Google Meet chat.
Uh, so I'll just have to open it on a separate device, right?
Yeah, sir.
Just give me a second.
So there was a question earlier regarding how to approach as a freelancer, how to approach clients as a
Yeah, can you just tell me the name of the YouTube channel?
yeah. So ACM Vidyalankar, all in caps.
Uh, can you just put it in the chat here?
Yeah, yeah, sir. I've put it in the chat here.
All right. Got it. Okay. How do I see the chat now?
So live chat.
I'll have to open this on YouTube. One second.
So you can switch it on here.
Got it. Okay. I can take it from
Timestamp.
53. All right. Thank you. Uh, got it. Okay. So the first one is Yash. Yash is asking, how can a non-CS IT branch student approach for jobs as a web dev? Do companies more give preference to above branch? No. So yes, nowadays it used to be the case earlier, but nowadays it is not the case anymore. Simply because there are so many people who are switching careers now, right? There are people in marketing and other teams who want to switch to tech. So what they look for now is portfolio, right? So like I mentioned in the resume, you have to have three projects to show. If you have that, then you can easily crack it, right? If you have something to show that you've made this, then it will be that much easier for you to get that job. So yes, focus on making a portfolio, and the degree that you do doesn't really matter anymore. In fact, most companies now have started. Uh, they no longer ask for a compulsory college degree either. So they just look at your profile, what you have done, and they hire you based on that. Okay. What are the most important qualities that a full stack developer must have? So two things. One is logical thinking and problem solving. So logical thinking, and number two, problem solving. I'll tell you what I mean by this. People usually say these terms casually and they don't explain it, but let me do that for you. The first thing is when I say problem solving, let's begin with that. When I say problem solving, what I basically mean is you should be able I'm not saying you should be able to solve mathematical problems or any other scientific problems. Obviously not. What we mean is that your approach to problem solving, right? For example, if you are in a situation where let's say you have coded something and something goes wrong in the middle of the night, and your client or your manager calls you up and they are like, something is wrong, and take a look at it, fix it ASAP. That is what clients will say. And then at that point of time, if you say, holy shit, I have no idea what to do, or you panic, then that is being a terrible developer, right? So that is what problem solving means, your approach to solving the problem. And you should not panic at a problem. You should just take it one step at a time and be like, okay, let me see the log, let me see what went wrong, and then figure it out. Similarly, if you are learning web dev and somebody calls you up and they're like, we want you to build an e-commerce website for us, and you're like, I've just started learning, it is a big thing to do, I'm not sure if I'll be able to do that or not. So that kind of an attitude is not good for a developer. You should always be willing to take up a challenge and learn more. And so these are two three things that should be there. And number two, when it comes to logical thinking, what that means is you should be able to break a problem down into smaller steps, right? Again, like I said, if you get a call in the middle of the night that something is wrong, obviously the first step is open the server and look at the logs. There are error logs everywhere, right? Which is what happened, what went wrong. Then based on that, you can decide the next action to take. Similarly, if somebody tells you that they want you to make an e-commerce website, then you should know that, okay, first thing is, step one is talk to them, discuss the features. Step two is design. Step three is code, test, put it out there. So if you know the process, if you know the steps, that is what logical thinking is. Take a problem, break it down into smaller chunks, and then solve it one by one. So these are a few qualities that are required. And finally, number three is patience. Right? If you are somebody who's very impatient or who gets annoyed or angry very easily, then you will make a terrible developer, because the thing is, there are a lot of changes, right? When you start working on something, there are constant changes that take place. You might have to rewrite some part of the code, you might have to did something entirely and write something all over again. There are so many things that will change. So that is another thing that you should be okay handling, right? So you should be good at you should be patient, take it one thing at a time, one step at a time, and that is pretty much it. Okay, then does winning hackathons help in future? Yes. So that brings me back to college. I participated in exactly three hackathons and I won in exactly three hackathons in college. Back then it was more of a fun thing. I was just there because I wanted to experiment. So it was like you could stay there overnight, right? So it was a 24-hour thing or a 36-hour thing. And otherwise, usually our in times were 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock for the hostel. So that allowed us to stay late in the campus, and that was one of the reasons for participating in the first place. And yes, so it does help in some way, because you just have stories to tell, like I'm telling you now. But other than that, on the resume aspect, doesn't really matter a lot. But yes, you remember those things, and hopefully you win some prizes. So in that sense, it definitely helps. You have stories to tell. Um, Okay, how to approach clients if you are doing freelancing? So two simple things. Number one, if you're doing freelancing, build a portfolio first. Step one, build a portfolio. So three projects, absolutely essential. Number two, start putting word out there. Number three, you should know some technical, not technical, more financial terms. Right? You should know what a quotation document is. You should know what an invoice is. You should know some bank account transfer stuff like that. Right? Because these are things that are professional and the client will expect from you. Right? So the quotation document is essentially an estimate that you send. So after listening to their idea, you calculate that this much time it might take, this might be the cost needed, and then you send them an estimate that, okay, it might take 40,000, 50,000 rupees, or 5,000, 10,000, depending on the project. That is the first term quotation document. That is the first step. So first you send a quotation. Then number two, they will get back to you and they'll be like, okay, sounds good. Or usually they'll be like, this is too expensive. Let's let's try and reduce it further. But whatever the case is, once they agree with your price, then you go to design development, you do the whole thing, and then comes the invoice. So invoice is your request for payment, right? So you will send an invoice and they will then pay you that amount. So that is the invoice. And obviously, ideally, I recommend people to have a separate bank account for freelancing. So if you really want to get into freelancing, just create another bank account which is just for your freelancing financials, so that it gets easier to keep a track of what is happening. And if you keep it with your regular savings account, then it gets messed up. All the money is all over the place. So typically that is the third thing. And again, when you start approaching clients, like I said, the first few projects, the first few calls will go terrible because you have no idea what to say. But with time, when you listen to their questions, you will know what to talk about, or you will know what they ask you. And that is how you get better. So you just have to make those first 10 calls, assuming that you will not get the project, and then the 11th call is where you will get it. Right? So that is how you approach a client. Mm, okay. So the next one is, can you give few ideas for good projects? Um, So three, four things actually. Good question. First of all, so first thing is you can make a product landing page. Right, a product landing page is a very simple project. It's a one-page project, right? Just one single page where you typically have features of the product, some dummy data, right? Dummy data. You can have features, some feedback, stuff like that. That is the first thing. Number two, what you can make is a blog. Right? A blog is a beautiful project to begin with because it requires some functionality as well. You have to make a backend from where you can upload posts and stuff like that. So that is number two. And number three, you can mimic. So if you can't come up with your own idea, you can just mimic an existing thing. So just pick up any website that you think that you like or that you use on a daily basis and try to replicate. Right. So those are a couple of things that you can begin with. Huh. So Siddesh, I don't have a meme page exactly, but I have an Instagram handle where I've now started putting memes. I'm trying to create original memes. Most of what you saw in the PPT were from Google, but yes, on my Instagram now I have started putting some meme content as well. Okay. So there's one final question. We'll take that and then we can close this. So is Kotlin better than Java? Uh, Technically, no. So Kotlin, for everybody who does not know, Kotlin is the latest language in terms of app dev that Google is favoring like crazy. And the reason why they're doing it is because just like Apple has a separate ecosystem using Swift, Microsoft has a separate ecosystem using C Sharp, where you need to know Swift or C Sharp to code in to make a Mac app or a Windows app. Google used Java so far, which is pretty public, which is pretty open. So what they're trying to do is they are trying to make it slightly exclusive. So that is why Kotlin is being favored by them. But for the next few years, they have to support both Java and Kotlin because there are people who are still making Android apps with Java. So from a long-term perspective, Kotlin is a better approach. But for the next few years, Java will still be around. Okay, so one good question. This is Charushila Shinde. So it depends. It depends. So the question is, should you master front end or back end, or should you go for learning both? So that actually depends on what you want to do. Right? If you want to work with a startup, they look for a full stack developer. So in that case, you should learn both. But if you intend to get into a multi, like an MNC or Wipro, Cognizant, TCS, those kind of companies, then they hire separate backend and front end developers. So if your intention is to go to corporate, then you should focus on one of them. If you want to work with a startup, then focus on both of them. That is the idea, right? So yes, hopefully that makes sense. Now, one final message, one final tip of the day before we wrap it up is about what I like to call uh, following multiple passions, right? So this was something that we discussed in another meetup. This happened in Nagpur. There were a few people. I was giving a talk, and one of the questions was really interesting. So for people who know me, they know that I do like five, six different things, in a day. So I read, I write, I teach, I code, and I also used to manage my own company for a few 5, 6, 7 different things that I used to do in a single day. And the question was, how do you manage? So first of all, why do you do so many things? And number two, how do you manage that? Right. So I'll just quickly tell you, whenever we talk about passion, it is always discussed in a singular sense. Right? People always say, find your passion, find your passion. But what I differ from that opinion in one perspective, that it need not be singular. Right. I
Just a minute, guys. So we'll be back. Guys, we'll be sending a feedback form on the chat. Just go through it and you'll get your certificates accordingly.
all right. Don't know what went wrong there.
Yes, sir. No problem.
Uh, the stream is still on, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah. So the final bit that I was trying to get to was that we always talk about passion in a singular sense, right? People always say, find that one thing that you love, try to do that one thing that you love. And what I've come to realize is that is not the case, right? It is absolutely okay to love multiple things at the same time, and it is amazing to be able to do so many things simultaneously. Right? So if you are, I have seen a lot of my friends who were beautiful. They were painters, they were writers. They used to write beautiful stuff, paint beautiful things, and as soon as they join corporate, all of that stopped. Right? So they're like, we don't have time to do that anymore, and stuff like that. And that is not, that excuse is not just not good enough to let it go. Right? So the idea is very simple. No matter what you uh, get to eventually, don't let go of that one or two things that you absolutely love. Right? Your job is one part of it, it should be there, but at the same time, all of these other things are also important. So yes, that is pretty much it from my side for the day. And yeah, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Thank you, sir, so much. It was a really good session. I hope everyone loved it on in the chat also. Guys in the chat, we'll send the feedback form in a while. You'll stay and then just go through it. We'll send your certificates soon in a day or so. Yes.
All right,
Thank you
perfect. Thank you
everyone
so much,
for
you guys, for attending.
participating. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much, you guys, for attending. I hope you learned something you did not know before. And yes, that is pretty much it. So yeah, bye bye. All the best.
Thank you, sir. Bye, sir. Third time run there. Third time run there.